Hey, what's up everyone? So, I'm really sorry that my content is very sporadically posted and that I don't have a regular schedule. But, I keep telling myself, hey, you need to make these videos. But then, life happens and the next thing I know, it's been a long hot minute since I've talked to y'all. So, yeah. Now, I know I don't usually drink on my channel, but we're gonna be rebels today. There's that real popular quote, well-behaved women rarely make history. And honestly, that's really true. Throughout most of history, women were just expected to be complicit and seen but not heard. But there were some women who decided that they were just going to give society the finger and live their lives to the fullest. We're going to talk about these women in this new series that I like to call Make sure to go ahead and hit that like button down below if you like this kind of content. And also, while you're down there, hit that subscribe button so you can be up to date every time I do post a new video, which hopefully is going to start being more consistent soon. But yeah, let's get into it. Oh, and before I forget, so we're talking about this badass Chinese woman today. So there's going to be a lot of Chinese names that I'm going to have to say. And I know this is going to be hard for you guys to hear and, probably even harder for you to believe. But I don't speak a word of Chinese. So please forgive my botched pronunciations, but I will try my best. So throughout China's extensive history, women rarely ever had any sort of official power. So starting in the Sui dynasty, someone had to take a Confucian civil service exam to have any kind of government office. But, only, of course, men were able to take this exam, so only men had government positions. The only way for a woman to have any sort of power was to become an imperial consort or to become an empress. But obviously that wasn't very feasible for most women in the country. So the only way for most women to be able to have any sort of power was through personal connections. And most of that was through familial ties. And again, most of those were between a mother and her son. And this kind of power dynamic would only give her sort of power in her own house. There was this one woman, however, in the Ching dynasty who had attained so much power that it went well beyond the confines of any one household. Shi Yang was born in 1755 in the Canton region of southern China. She was born a commoner, so of course she was illiterate, and she was also a woman, so. She doesn't really like to talk about her early life, so there's really not a whole lot known about it. What we do know, though, is that she worked as a prostitute in the flower boats. Basically what these are these gigantic palace-type structures built on boats that would sail up and down the coastline looking for their customers. She became very well known in the region for her intelligence and her business savviness and even her ability to trade confidential information. In 1801, Shi Yang married Cheng I. Now Cheng I was a pirate king who came from a very long line of pirates. There's a couple of different theories on how exactly this marriage came to be. Some people think that he just thought she was so beautiful and became infatuated with her and just had to have her as his wife. Other people think that he fell in love with her for her intellect and he wanted someone who could help him run his fleet. Other people think that maybe he ordered a raid on Canton and they kidnapped her and she was his favorite prostitute, so then he decided to take her as a wife. Regardless of how it actually happened, she did agree to marry him, but only on her conditions. She demanded that if they were to get married, she was going to own half of his fleet and she would have the opportunity to help him get rich. Cheng said yes, and Shi Yang forever became known as Ching Shih, which literally means Cheng's wife. So the couple managed to increase the number of their ships exponentially under the control of the two of them. When the couple got married, Cheng I only had 200 ships in his fleet. With Ching Shih by his side, he ended up with, 600 ships, 1,000 ships, 1,800 ships. They were able to make this exponential growth by creating an alliance with all the other pirates in the area who dominated the South Chinese Sea. They became known as the Red Flag Fleet. What? So now we have a friend. In 1804, Portugal had a trading post in Macau, and so the Red Flag Fleet decided that they were going to create a blockade of the trading post. The Portuguese sent... Oh, okay, bye. The Portuguese tried to fight back against the blockade, but they were very easily defeated. And then the British were sitting there, and they were just not wanting any part of that. And, this is during the early 1800s when the British Navy was at its peak. Think about how terrifying these pirates had to be for the British Navy to say, no, we're not going to get involved in this. Basically, the only thing Britain did was they would escort their own ships and the ships of their allies and hope that they didn't get raided by pirates. Cheng Shih was born as the son of a very poor fisherman, and they lived in a southern region of China. When he was 15 years old in 1798, Cheng I actually kidnapped him and took him into his fleet. Cheng Shih actually embraced the pirate lifestyle, and he was ambitious and he was charismatic, which allowed him to rise quickly through the ranks. This made him the favorite of Cheng I, and Cheng realized that he needed an heir for once he finally died, and so him, along with Ching Shih, decided to adopt Cheng Shih. In 1807, they had about 50 to 70,000 men under their command. Sadly, on November 16th, Cheng I was murdered in Vietnam. Now, Ching Shih had a choice to make. She could either do the very traditional widow facade and, end up going back into prostitution after her time of grieving and everything, or she could decide to take over for her late husband and become the leader of the Red Flag Fleet. Obviously, she didn't want to go back to prostitution, and so she decided to become the leader of the Red Flag Fleet, and she actually faced no opposition. So to ensure that no one would challenge her, she made an alliance with Cheng Shih, and she made him second in command. So he would be the official captain of the fleet, and he would lead the men into all these raids and battles and everything. This gave Ching Shih enough time to actually sit down and work out all the business aspects of the fleet, work out all the military strategies that she wanted to complete. And it also, governing an entire fleet of pirates, that took a lot of work. And while, yes, he was, one of the heads of all the pirates, he was still loyal to Ching Shih, so that gave her complete power. And during this time, they actually developed a romantic relationship with one another. Now, I know what you're thinking. Didn't I just go through talking about how Cheng and Ching Shih adopted Cheng Shih as their son? Yes, I did. And yes, I did just say that they developed a romantic relationship with each other. To be fair, he's 21 at this point, and I guess technically he was never actually her son. It was more of like a formality so they could have an heir. So we're just going to leave that right there. Ching Shih needed the support of her late husband's family. She became allies with two of his nephews, Ching Gang and Ching Shih. This ultimately ended up with her having the support of his family, which was great because now she really did have complete control over the fleet. She gained the trust of the most loyal fleet captains first, and then after that she managed to gain the support of all of the captains throughout the entire fleet. The Red Flag Fleet was the biggest fleet in Ching Shih's time. The British Navy tried to help the Chinese government by taking her down, but she actually ended up sinking their ship, and she took 7 sailors and 1 official from the East India Company hostage in 1809. Richard Glasspool was one of these sailors that was kidnapped. He came back and estimated that she had about 80,000 men under her control, with 1,000 large ships and 600 smaller ships and rowboats. This number was even bigger than some countries' entire navies. To allow her to maintain her power and to keep order over such a large fleet, Ching Shih set up a very strict set of laws for her pirates to follow. First of all, if a superior gave you a command and you either A, ignored it, or B, gave an order contradictory to what they said, loot was to be put up for an inspection. Once it was registered, it would be given to the fleet captain to distribute amongst his crew. The ship that brought in the loot would receive 20%, and the other 80% would go to a common fund, which would be distributed evenly throughout the entire fleet. If you were caught withholding loot, you were given a one-time warning, which consisted of a whipping. The second time you were caught doing it, open his head! And then, on top of that, if you were found to be withholding a very large amount of loot, regardless of if you had done it before or not, open the head! The pirates could not steal from the common fund, nor could they rob the villages that supplied the ships. If you did, open the heads! Deserters surprisingly were able to keep their heads, mostly. They would have their ear chopped off, and then they would be paraded around as some sort of example for the rest of the crew to follow. Now, if they captured women during a raid, there were a few different options that could take place. If they decided that a woman was unattractive, they would just let her go, be on her way, a free woman. Which, okay, real talk for a second. How would you feel if you were kidnapped and then they were like, oh, you're ugly, you can go? Would you be offended, or would you be like, okay, yeah, sure, I'm ugly, okay, bye? Comment down below and let me know what you think, because honestly, I don't know how I would feel. If they decided that the woman was attractive, then she would be held for ransom, or she would even be auctioned off to the crew. If a pirate raped a woman, off with his head! Now, this one's a little weird, like the other ones weren't. If they had consensual sex with a woman and were caught, the man, off with his head! But then the woman whom he had slept with, she would have cannonballs tied to her legs and then thrown overboard. But then, a pirate could decide that he wanted to marry any woman that he wanted. The only condition of this was that he had to be faithful to her for the rest of his life. And if he wasn't, yep, you guessed it. There were other punishments as well, such as, like flogging and quartering and being clapped into irons. Ching Shih was the only person who was allowed to decide if someone was going to be rewarded or if they were going to be punished. She spoke, and her pirates listened. Any sort of operation they wanted to undergo, they had to get the okay from Ching Shih before they could even consider doing it. Soon she took dominance over the South China Sea and earned the name of Terror of South China. She had hegemonies all over this area, and she imposed taxes and had levies on people. And of course, being pirates, they would go and raid cities. There was one city in particular that they raided in 1808 where they beheaded 80 men and they enslaved all of the women and the children, if that would give you any idea of how ruthless they were. Ching Shih would use violence to fund her success in being a pirate queen. Anyone who resisted her would have their feet nailed to the decks of ships, and then they would be beaten severely. But not only did they have the traditional piracy acts of raiding merchant ships or going to pillage villages by using river systems and everything. Ching Shih grew their business to even include things like protection schemes and blackmail and extortion. There is a thought that she was an opium smuggler as well, but there's no proof of that, so... She had a very extensive network of spies in the mainland, and she also had connections with all these farmers that would provide her crew with food. I'm gonna get drunk and not be able to do it. Her fleet managed to sink 63 Chinese official ships. That really resulted in Portugal and Britain just saying, no, we're not going anywhere near her. In January of 1808, the Qing government decided that they had had enough of this terror just plaguing South China. So they sent a naval campaign down there to just completely end all of it. The Navy suffered an embarrassing defeat, and they actually had all of their ships captured, and they had to go back to the mainland in boats. The Red Flag Fleet had been undefeated for a very long time. So long, in fact, that Chiang Po-sai got pretty cocky. He decided in September of 1809 to confront the Portuguese flotilla and challenge them to a duel. So they start battling, and this collective number of battles is known as Battle of Tiger's Mouth. And let's just say this was not a good idea for Cheng Shih. The Red Flag Fleet ended up losing a lot of ships, but they also were not defeated at the same time. These battles went on for months, and they finally ended in January of 1810. The government realized that Ching Shih could not be beaten by sheer force alone, so they realized that they had to be a little bit more creative in how to get her to stop. They offered amnesty to the entire crew in exchange for them stopping their pirate lives. There was one catch, however. Part of the deal was that they were going to have to kneel in front of the Chinese government and surrender all of the wealth they had accrued. Now, Ching Shih thought that was completely stupid and unreasonable. So she marched into Zhang Bailing's office, who was the governor of Canton. She charges into his office, unarmed, to discuss this. And they go back and forth, but they're completely deadlocked on this whole kneeling aspect. But then they finally come up with a sort of workaround. Ching Shih asks Zhang Bailing if he can completely just abolish the mother-son relationship she has with Cheng Shih. And he does. So this allows them to actually get married. And Zhang Bailing performs the wedding ceremony, and he acts as their witness. So Ching Shih and Cheng Shih had to kneel in front of him during the ceremony and give thanks to him. Which, I mean, they're still kneeling, but at least it's a little better, right? Ching Shih ultimately accepts this deal, and she retires from her life of piracy at only the age of 35. And she's able to keep all of the wealth that she obtained while being a pirate. She was allowed to keep 80 ships for her personal use, and then an extra 40 ships for use in the salt trade. Her crew was also given the deal of amnesty, and all they had to do was surrender their weapons, and that was it. Ultimately, fewer than 400 of her men were punished, and only 126 of them were executed. The rest of them were able to keep their wealth, and they were even offered military jobs. Ching Shih and Cheng Shih had a son in 1813 named Sheng Yulin. They also had a daughter a couple of years later, but her birth year has just been completely lost in history. Tragically, in 1822, Cheng Shih dies at sea, and he was only 36 years old. Ching Shih moves back to her hometown of Canton, and she opens a gambling house and a brothel using all the riches that she had obtained. And in 1844, at the age of 69, Ching Shih dies peacefully in her bed with her entire family surrounding her as a free woman. Make sure to leave a comment down below of what you think of Ching Shih and her ability to command such a large fleet. Also, if you know of any extremely awesome, badass women that you think needs recognition, go ahead and leave that in a comment down below, or you can even hit me up on Twitter. I'll see you guys next time.